Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here in June. A very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. And welcome on this Wednesday morning to episode 11 of Smallville, the saviour of Superman. Who's that behind me? It's the mighty John Glover, in the very year that he finally came onto social media. I remember it very, very well. He didn't have a blue check mark at first. I wasn't sure if it was him. It was too good to be true. Eventually he got one. Eventually he went on to Instagram as well, and it's been great. He's a really great guy. I want to talk about John Glover. I want to talk about Lionel Luthor, but I want to talk about, I've already told you that Descent is my favourite episode of Smallville of all time. There's no question about it. It's the achievement. Anyone who's creating a TV show right now wants to create an arc. You've always got to make sure. I mean, you never know how long you're going to be renewed for, of course. But if you do get multiple seasons, that you actually do finish off a character's arc in the right way. And as I said in the other video a couple of days ago, Descent was an unsaid promise. This is how it was always going to end. We pretty much knew that Lex at some point was going to kill Lionel. John Glover even joked about it in multiple interviews. But it's the way it was done. It was so clever. And again, I mentioned this the other day when talking about Descent, but I want to go into more detail about the opening scene of Descent, which is Lionel Luthor's final ever episode in Smallville. The OG Lionel Luthor, not the other Lionel Luthor we saw in the final season and the finale. The less I say about Darkseid Lionel, the better. I'll be fascinated to know how John Glover sees all that. But anyway, let's talk about. Originally, I wasn't sure. I was kind of split whether that final scene, that iconic scene, should have been the teaser for that episode, the opening scene before the intro. But in years gone by now, I think it was absolutely the right decision. It absolutely worked because they could have done it in the final. This episode didn't have to be Descent. They could have had his death in the final scene, and then the next episode could have been the Descent episode. So they could have gone either way. But I think this was the best way to go. And now, when that scene opens, it's just beautiful. I watched that opening sequence multiple times. I'm obsessed with it. But just let's look at the story. Before we look at the acting, before we look at John Glover and Michael Rosenbaum and what they achieved together for 7 seasons, let's look at this actual scene. I've always believed, and I mentioned this the other day, that Lionel knew he was going into that office to die. That was his plan. That was his aim. This is why Lionel left the key in the first place with Chloe to give to Clark. That's why he left a message via the Kryptonian box. And by the way, that message, that voice message via the Kryptonian instrument was so iconic. And I can't remember the dialogue exactly, but it goes a bit like this. In my lifetime, I've known kings, sultans, and I always thought I was superior to them all. Until the day I met you, Kal-El, and I knew serving you has been my honour, or something along those lines. And it's serving and protecting you has been my honour. It's such an iconic scene. Tom Welling's performance is brilliant, but it's really emotional to see the arc of Lionel Luthor fulfilled. He starts off as I suppose if you remember Dallas, you'll know the J.R. Ewing comparison. He's not a nice guy in the opening seasons of Smallville. He gets more and more evil within the first 3 seasons. But then from season 4, when he's touched and swaps places with Clark, he starts to get touched by Clark's goodness, and he changes. I think at first he genuinely wants to protect Clark when he finds out his secret, and he is doing the right thing. But he's damaged Lex so badly, and there's no going back from that. And that's why Lex was always going to kill him. And I think what happens in his final scene in Descent, as I say, he knows he's got to go up there, and he wants to manipulate Lex into killing him. Now you're saying, Mick, that's nuts. Why would he want to die? Because this is a desperate act by a desperate man. Now, we know that Lex, was it in season 2, talked about him trying to create some kind of Cain and Abel fantasy. And I think ultimately, when he finds out about Clark, I think that's what he wants to do as well. He kind of wants to protect Clark. He wants to be a good guy now, but he also, in the back of his mind, he's still a twisted son of a bitch. So I think, because look, when he falls out that window, the guy's smiling with pride. He's smiling like a guy. How many people, how many characters have got the balls to be pushed out of a window knowing they're about to die and to be smiling with pride because he got what he wanted? First of all, he's looking at Lex. He's finally proud of Lex because Lex did what he had to do. Lex didn't do it because of what Lionel did to him. Lex did it because he felt he had to kill him. He had to take the key, then kill him so Lionel couldn't stop him. As he says to the other version of himself, the purer version of himself, when he throws the glass into the fire in the mansion. I had no choice. And that's the whole thing. So he goes up to that office to get killed. He wants Lex to kill him for whatever reason, for a multitude of reasons. So he goes up there. Lex is giving him the whole monologue about King Arthur. Then Lex asks him, "Why did you sacrifice me for the Traveller? Who is it, Dad? Who is it?" Then Lionel does his worst manipulations. One of them, it's got to be his greatest manipulation. And he says to Lex, "Well, what if I told you you're the Traveller?" And of course, Lex doesn't swallow it. But Lionel knows. You see, Lionel's playing a double bluff. And it's very, very interesting to me what he does because he knows Lex isn't going to swallow it. The whole thing is to manipulate Lex into killing him. That's what he wants at that point. He knows it's over. He knows that Clark doesn't trust him anymore. Maybe it's suicide, but he certainly goes into that office to die. He certainly does that because ultimately his actions don't save Clark. Lex does get hold of the key. Lex does get hold of the orb, and he has got control of Clark in the season 7 finale. So if he wanted to, this is Lionel Luthor, he could have stayed alive and protected Clark, but he couldn't. He couldn't protect Clark, and ultimately, did he fail or did he succeed in his mission? I think he succeeded. He manipulated Lex into killing him, which is amazing. Because he could always press Lex's buttons. Lex probably didn't know that, but he always knew what to say to get Lex to react a certain way. And so he's in this office and he's manipulating him, says, "You can't go to Zurich, you can't open that strongbox." But really, he's saying the opposite of what he wants. He wants Lex to get the orb. He wants Lex to attempt to control Clark. And this is what I loved about Lionel Luthor and the way he was written and the way John played him. He wasn't a one-dimensional character. He was a multifaceted character, and he wasn't just bad. He was many things. He wanted Lex to be strong. He wanted Lex, basically like most fathers want of their sons. Basically, they want their sons to be like them. And this is what Lionel's doing from really the pilot episode when he's reading the Daily Planet. He's putting Lex down because he thinks this is, again, even in the pilot, he's saying the opposite thing from what he wants from Lex. And this is what he always did. I think it's fascinating. And it's, when you think about this show, that this was on the WB and the CW, a channel for teenagers, teenage girls and people like that, but everyone, all ages and all demographics were watching Smallville. It was about Superman, but it was such a multifaceted TV show. And one of our most key successes in their 7 seasons was the character dynamics. They were all so interesting and as exciting as the superhero battles and the special effects. So you weren't bored when Clark wasn't saving someone. It was amazing. You had Lex and Clark, Lex and Lionel, Clark and Lionel, Lionel and Martha, Chloe and Lionel, Chloe and Clark, Lorna and Clark. There were so many faceted dynamics. Clark and Jonathan, and that's one of the strongest dynamics on the first 7 seasons of Smallville. Jor-El and Clark, amazing. Even Jor-El and Jonathan, even that was amazing. The adopted father versus the biological father. It was amazing. They took all the elements of Superman and made them interesting. So when you say to me, you can't make Superman relatable. You can't make Clark relatable. You can't make those characters relatable and interesting. Smallville did it. And Smallville did it all without having Superman adventures. He was still Superman without the costume, though. That's what the whole thing worked. So if anyone's looking, I mean, I just spoke on the DCEU Daily about Justin Kroll confirming that J.J. Abrams will write and direct the Superman movie. I think JJ should look to Smallville. I think anyone who's about to jump on a Superman film should look to Smallville, because Smallville broke all the rules. Smallville said Superman can be relatable, he can be interesting, and Tom Welling did make him interesting and relatable. No question about that. And so this is what I'm talking about. And you bring on a theatrical actor like John Glover, who has been on film, has been on television, but hasn't been the big, Jack Nicholson actor. I mean, we heard the other day that John said apparently he heard Tim Burton wanted him as his first choice for the Joker in the '89 Batman movie. So that just shows how respected John Glover's always been in the industry. So our Miles were geniuses. They got one of the most talented actors in Hollywood, who maybe wasn't as successful in media, but he was very talented. And to get him for 7 seasons playing this arc, which was very pivotal and very important to Smallville, was amazing. And it shows you how intelligent our Miles are as creatives. And to get an actor like that, and you don't get actors like this, you don't get arcs like this in CW TV shows. Just look at them. Look at Arrow. Look at Arrowverse. When do you get anything with deep cuts? Smallville had so many deep cuts. And the biggest deep cut is that Lionel Luthor, in his final ever scene, went up to Luthor Court Plaza, went into that office because he knew he had to manipulate Lex into killing him. And I think that's amazing.